Hello and welcome to DocSend's Perfect Pitch video series, where we put our research and data to work in giving you actionable tips for your fundraising. I'm Justin Itzo, I run research here at DocSend, and today's video is 3 shifts in VC scrutiny for pre-seed fundraising. Let's get started. The data for today's video comes from our 2020 pre-seed report. And what I want to take you through are 3 key shifts that we saw in how investors looked at pitch decks. We noticed that 3 sections stood out compared to previous years. I want to take you through each one, explain what should go into them, and then end with some actionable tips for putting your pitch deck together and taking these 3 key sections into consideration. So the first focus area that we want to highlight today is the competitive landscape section. Now, in 2019's report, we found that this was a pretty unremarkable section. In terms of how much time investors spent on it, it was pretty middle of the pack. However, last year, we found a 51% increase in time spent on this section, taking us to nearly a minute of investor time. Now, if you know anything about VCs, you know that their time is pretty valuable and they're always really busy. So if they're spending nearly a minute on a section, that means it's pretty important. Your competitive landscape section should be where you outline your product's uniqueness and its relation to the competitors in your field. So it's kind of a show what you know and show how you stand out. The second section is the product readiness section. This is a 3 to 5 page section where you're really going deep into your product. You're giving wireframes, maybe even a video demonstration of how it works, screenshots of certain features. And it differs from early slides in your pitch deck, like your solution or problem slide, because it allows you to get into much more depth than those earlier slides, which should be much more pithy, succinct, and designed to hook investors and get them reading further in your deck. Your product readiness section should go deep. And here, last year, we found a 46% increase in time spent on product readiness. At the pre-seed stage, this is crucial, and it signals that investors are really looking for finished products or products in some stage of completion, even at this early stage. With so much investor money coming into the fundraising system, it means that investor criteria for what's fundable and what's not are getting more strict. And companies that can develop and showcase a ready product or a product at least in alpha or beta testing stand a much better chance of attracting investors. And investors, as we're seeing here, are really ready and willing to spend time on this section if you've got detailed product features and highlights to show. Our third section is the business model section. Now this is key. We saw a 28% increase in the amount of time spent on this section in 2020 compared to 2019. And this suggests that companies, even at the early pre-seed stage, should have a pretty clear sense of how they're going to monetize their cool idea. We're beyond a moment where a minimum viable PowerPoint or minimum viable product can really just get you funding with a sort of back of the napkin pitch deck. Investors really want to see that you've thought about how you're planning to monetize your product and how that monetization plan might change over time. Now, what I want to stress in thinking about these sections is that you should think about them as interrelated, right? So don't think about your competition, product, or business model sections in isolation. Rather, think of these as parts of a whole. So develop your product and your product section in relation to your competitive landscape and in relation to a scheme for monetization. Thinking about these as interrelated parts will show investors, first, that you've put a lot of deep, meaningful thought into your business, but also that you are actually a fully fledged business rather than a PowerPoint and a product. And as fundraising gets more competitive, even at these earlier stages, investors are looking for fully fledged companies. They want to see that you are something that can build out into the next big thing. And this brings us to some actionable tips based on these 3 trends that we've seen. The first is relative to the competition slide. Show that you know the competitors in your space. Show that you've thought deeply about how your uniqueness makes you stand out in relation to the key competitors in your field. And that means you don't necessarily aim for the big dogs in your space. Don't try to differentiate yourself from Facebook or Uber or the Facebooks and Ubers in your space. Rather, think about which companies and products most closely compete with your own. Maybe they're at similar stages, or maybe they just received funding. And try to articulate where you can intervene in ways that they can't. Show investors that you can do this, and you stand a better chance of standing out. Secondly, make it clear that you've thought deeply about what your business model is currently and how it'll change over time. Investors don't necessarily need to see that you've got it all figured out, but what they do want to see is that you've thought meaningfully about what this means for you and what it looks like for the future of your business. They want to see that you're looking like a fully fledged company, as I said earlier, and not just a minimum viable PowerPoint. Investors are willing to spend more and more time scrutinizing your business model. And if they're willing to do so, it means you should have stuff to show. Have a plan and make sure you show how it might evolve over time. Basically, show that you've done a lot of work in thinking about this and what it might mean for the future of your company. Third, we want you to really lean into the shift toward early viable products. With so much investor money in the system and so much more noise from founders in the system, it means that you've got to do more to stand out than ever before. And that means maybe pushing your product into alpha and beta testing where 5 to 10 years ago you wouldn't have had to in order to get funded. We found that over half of the companies in our pre-seed data set from last year had products at least in the beta or already launched phase. And this means that having an early viable product is really becoming key to being fundable, quote unquote, even at the early pre-seed stage. So think about developing a product and getting it out there in the world before you fundraise or in conjunction with preparations to fundraise. This will go a long way towards showing investors that you're for real and that your product actually has a chance of getting some traction in the world. Finally, think about your business model and market fit while developing your product. Don't just start thinking about these things when you're developing a pitch deck. These aren't afterthoughts and shouldn't be considered as such. Rather, think about what your monetization plans are and what your product market fit might look like while you're building out your project or your product. This will make your product look much more organic and make your business look real, frankly. And it'll show investors that you've thought about this from the ground up and you've thought about building a business rather than a product or a pitch deck. As I keep saying, it'll show investors that you've got a lot more to show than just a good slide or just a good piece of software. The investors want to see more and more fully fledged businesses at this pre-seed stage, especially as more money flows toward earlier stages in the system. So putting these tips in action help you stand a better chance of wowing investors and standing out from the crowd. To dive deeper into the data, visit DocSend.com/perfectpitch.